tell us a bit about the raid in, believe it, in Muntinlupa in June of 1944?
Yeah, the Muntinlupa raid of June 23, 24, 1944. Terra Divoso learned that the Japanese were killing off their prisoners of war. So he was in a hurry to try to spring them. And so there were two preliminary attempts, and the third attempt was successful. Vic Estacio, one of the regimental commanders, wore a captured Japanese army uniform. So it was midnight. He banged the gate of the National Bilibid compound, and the guards were startled, so they opened it, and in went the raiding team. So they got the radio room, they disarmed the warden, and they were able to free maybe a score of their comrades in the hunters. And then they brought them to the camp in Rizal. So after that, there were two more successful escapes. So they were able to do this without losing any casualty. So in the Museum of the Veterans Federation of the Philippines, you will find all of these guerrilla victories. So to put into context the statements of Maniboy and Mr. Canilao, what we teach our students, the general framework of Philippine history, is that our history is, number one, a history of victories, starting with the Battle of Mactan, a history of sovereignty, but of course we have to continue to defend our sovereignty, and a history of democracy, which of course is imperfect and still requires maturity. But as far as World War II history is concerned, what I learned from the guerrillas, there are three periods in the history of World War II in the Philippines. The first period is the Philippine Defense Campaign, starting with the Pearl Harbor attack. Manila was also bombed. And it ends on May 6, 1942 with the fall of Corridor. So at this period, there were two fronts. The main front was Bataan and Corridor. And the Hunters ROTC had an idea for a second front, fighting outside of Bataan. They were not deployed according to War Plan Orange 3. And they did this, as Maniboy said, to relieve pressure on the defenders of Bataan. So there were victories during this period, like Battle of Solsona in Ilocos Norte, the liberation of Daet, Camarines Sur, May 1942. So we look at Bataan as a heroic self-resistance, and we remember the slogan, "Remember Erlinda." So there were victories both at Bataan, the Abukay line, and outside of Bataan. The second period is the meat of the Philippine contribution to World War II. This is the Philippine guerrilla movement, from the fall of Corridor to Battle of Leyte. So this is Empire Strikes Back. So MacArthur was doing the island hopping strategy in the Pacific. And there was a lie low order for the guerrillas to lie low, because the idea of the officers in the Southwest Pacific area is not to provoke the Japanese, but they had to defend their towns, not only from the Japanese, but from the collaborators. And that is the time when Marcos Agustin of Marking's guerrilla said, "I do not need anybody's permission to fight for my country." And so they held the line, they more than held the line. So this is the time of, there are two Pugadlawins in Philippine history. The better known one is the Cry Pugadlawin. That was the cry of independence, the Philippine Revolution by 1896. What Maniboy is referring to is August 13, 1942. The successful Hunters ROTC ambush of August 13, 1942. And according to his father, when they were doing that ambush, apparently the hooks were on a higher ground and they were watching the hunters.
Where did this take place?
At the border of Rizal and Laguna. And I asked Colonel De Ocampo if they did it to commemorate the original Pugad, and he said, no, that's coincidence. They were just Mike Ver, the founder, the founding commander of the Hunters, had to sacrifice himself because their first camp was raided by the Japanese. And he fell on the 4th of July, 1942. He was the only casualty. So at that point, when they had reassembled at the rallying point, they talked among themselves that no shame those who think that this is already serious. Because before that's like a bivouac, a picnic, although they did raids of college armories, but this was already serious. So those who
Want to go home?
yeah, no shame they could go home. But those who remained, they were the ones who now felt that in addition to fighting for democracy, it's righteous vengeance because you lost your comrade, and they were young men.
18, 19.
So
This was 20.
their first action was at Pogadlawin. And so that would also cover the Muntinlupa raid, which is still celebrated in the city of Muntinlupa.
Yeah, let me clear. Muntinlupa, for all of you who don't know, the Muntinlupa Penitentiary is equal to the French Bastille. This is the French Bastille. It was a highly secured penitentiary even during those times. The raid was successful. Not even a single shot was fired. They carted away all the arms, the radio, and their comrades, and some political prisoners. And there was no casualty. There was no casualty. That's why it became a classic. And it's being studied. And Los Baños.
And sa third period pa yan. We're still on the second period.
We're in the second period.
So, yeah, so the graduation exercise of the Hunters, because they would train new recruits, is to go on a raid. If you survive, you graduate.
No, that's the truth. My father was one of the
Mr. Guerillas.
one of the tactical and training officer of the Hunters. He graduates his people. He graduates his people by going on a raid, and they are graded, observed. Those who
Yeah,
survive,
how they behave
how
during
they,
the raid.
how they behaved, how they perform during the march to and from and during the raid. Those who survive gets a high mark. Those who doesn't, well,
Their reward is to become full-fledged guerrillas.
yeah. So that's how it is. But it worked. You see, the next step to that was the Hunters had so many reserve officers that Terry had to send them out to the provinces. That's why the expansion was from Apari, no, all of northern Luzon. In fact, the second biggest concentration of the Hunters, intelligence and combat officer, was in Pampanga, covering up to Zambales. No, these were the Hawks was actually trained by the Hunters.
No, because they saw the
Yeah, that's what he was saying earlier. When the Pugadlawin raid was happening, the Hook Balahaps were on a higher ground watching the raid, watching the ambush.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, they sent representation to Terry to train the Hook Balahaps on how to fight. No, it was not Taruk. No, Taruk is the political face.
Yes.
It is Alejandrino who is the real leader.